One of the most significant changes for the release of PowerMILL version 10 is the introduction of the background processing functionality. Background processing will have a big influence on the way we interact with PowerMILL and will give the user far greater programming flexibility and increase their productivity considerably. In simple terms, background processing allows us to calculate boundaries, stock models, but most importantly toolpaths in the background while continuing to work in the foreground as normal. A huge benefit of background processing is the ability to calculate two toolpaths simultaneously. One toolpath calculating in the background and one toolpath calculating in the foreground, both happening at the same time. And because the background calculation is a totally separate process, this means it can use a new allocation of system memory. This will theoretically double the amount of memory available to our PowerMILL project, as the background process on a 32-bit Windows can take up to 3 GB and the foreground process can also take up to 3 GB, giving us a total of 6 GB available to our current PowerMILL project. Having this extra memory available to our project means that we are less likely to run into memory problems when working with large parts. We will now go through an example of using background processing. In the PowerMILL Explorer we can see 4 toolpaths ready to be processed. If we take the first roughing toolpath and look at the settings for that toolpath, you'll notice on the offset area clearance form there is a new button added to the bottom of the form called Q. Applying this Q button will add the toolpath to a background processing queue ready for calculation. So if we go ahead and apply, you'll notice that the icon associated with that roughing toolpath has changed now from the calculator to the background processing icon. This is an indication to the user that this toolpath is being processed in the background. And you can see that the foreground is still totally available for me to interact with. So next I'm going to activate the rest roughing toolpath and look at the settings for that toolpath, and we're also going to queue this toolpath for calculation in the background. So while those 2 toolpaths are calculating in the background, I am going to consider now the finishing operations. The first thing I want to do is calculate a boundary for the shallow machining. So I have my shallow boundary settings prepared and I'm going to apply that. So that boundary is now being calculated in the foreground while the rest roughing toolpath is still being calculated in the background. You can see now that the roughing toolpath has already finished calculating because the icon has changed to the light bulb. So there we have the boundary calculated. And now I'm going to go to the raster toolpath to machine inside that shallow boundary, and I'm going to queue that for calculation in the background. At any time I can view my background calculation queue by simply clicking on the icon in the new status toolbar. And there we can see it tells me that the rest roughing has just finished calculating, and then the shallow toolpath is now being prepared for calculation. So I can view the roughing toolpath that was calculated in the background plus the rest roughing toolpath, and as you can see the icon next to the shallow toolpath is indicating that it's being processed in the background. So what we'll do is, while that's being processed in the background, we will calculate the constant Z toolpath in the foreground. So now we have two toolpaths being processed simultaneously. The constant Z toolpath has now finished calculating, and so has the shallow raster toolpath in the background. Both the background process and the foreground process will take full advantage of the new multi-threading capabilities in PowerMILL. This means that multiple CPUs or multiple cores inside a computer will be used to their maximum. This will further increase the productivity and reduce the toolpath calculation times considerably in PowerMILL 10.